All right, welcome to the Communication and Media Studies Career Day, a collaboration between the Career Development Center and the Communication and Media Studies Department. My name is Erin, and I'm the Administrative and Recruiting Coordinator for the Career Development Center. Throughout the day, we've invited alumni to join us for conversations about their careers in order to give you insight into different career paths, industries, and get advice on how to enter and thrive in these fields. These sessions will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel within about a week. Just a note, please change your view to speaker view rather than gallery view because we have spotlighted our guest today, and that way it's easier for you to view the interview. Our final guest today is Erin Raftery. Welcome, Erin. Erin Raftery graduated from SJU in 2015. At SJU, she majored in communications, English, and history. Erin currently holds the role of the communications coordinator for the Brookings Institution, the most influential think tank in Washington, D.C. Erin has worked at the Brookings Institution for a year and a half and is also pursuing her graduate degree at Texas A&M University's Bush School of Government and Public Service. While at St. Joe's, Erin held the roles of news editor and managing editor for the Hawk newspaper and was involved with weekly service through the campus ministry. I'm delighted to welcome Erin back to Hawk Hill. So Erin, I have a list of 10 questions I'll be asking you this afternoon, followed by 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A from our listeners. Audience, feel free to write your questions in the chat box that will be shared with our guest during the Q&A at the end of the session. All right, let's get started. So we're going to begin with a series of career-focused questions. So Erin, could you first describe within your current role the core responsibilities and what a typical day or week looks like for you?
Sure, absolutely. So my main role is media relations. So I field all calls from journalists and also emails that come in. I also work in outreach and promotions. So any sort of press releases or media pitching falls on my shoulders for any blogs, reports, or any publications that our scholars write. And I'm in charge of our Twitter account, so anything for promotions on that end. I also coordinate live tweeting for events that our scholars put on, anything like that. A normal day for me would start with putting together a daily email of clips. So our scholars are cited in the New York Times or interviewed for MSNBC, CNN, anything that they're picked up on, I put together and send around to our whole staff so people can see the impact of our scholars. And then also any calls that come in, any emails that come in, scheduling interviews with our scholars. And for a week, it's more publication focused. So every Monday we team up and huddle with our comms team and look forward to see what reports we're putting out, blogs we're putting out, and how we can get the messages out there based on those.
That's awesome. Thank you. When did you know that this was the career path that you wanted to pursue, and what led you to that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked in journalism for a couple of years after St. Joe's. And then decided to go to grad school at Texas A&M and get a degree in international relations. But I knew that I wanted to still be in the communications field and still keep up with writing. And while I was in grad school, I took a communications job for the program. And it was through that I realized that this was kind of on the other side of journalism that I wanted to be in. And it combined my skills of my grad program and also what I had been doing already. And so that's when I kind of decided to apply for comms jobs following my grad degree.
That's awesome. It's great when things line up like that.
Yeah.
All right, next question. What is the typical career path for an entry-level associate within your organization?
Sure, yeah. So my job would be the standard entry level as communications coordinator. And then from that point, we each kind of have a program within Brookings. So I'm in the Metro program. There's also a foreign policy, economic studies. So within the program, it's typical to kind of move up to comms director and be more in charge of the larger impact and outreach and projects. And we're working more closely with scholars on that. And moving up from there, we also have essential communications for Brookings. And so we have a lot of people that kind of move to that path as well to work more institution-wide.
Awesome. What do you enjoy most about your profession, and what is something that you wish you could change?
So what I enjoy most is how impactful it is, which I didn't realize until I got into it. So working for my job and realizing the type of news sources that are covering the work that our scholars are doing. We had one report that went out about essential workers and hazard pay in the pandemic. And that ended up getting covered extremely widely, to the point where Amazon and Walmart reached out to the scholar who wrote the report, wanting to talk to her about what she would recommend and how they could improve their hazard pay, which was really cool. So knowing that what I help with on social media and media releases and everything like that actually had a wide reach and a wide audience, and just seeing the impact that that had, I said would definitely be the best part of it. um, and something that I would change, I guess this is more specific to my type of comms, which is the nonprofit, as opposed to something that's more PR, but wanting to have a better communication and relationship with journalists. So coming from a journalist background, sometimes the comms director and the journalist can be a bit combative. And so trying to tackle that and hopefully having that change, I try to work on that. And that's something that I would probably change in the field.
Great answer. What has surprised you the most about your career thus far?
Yeah, I would say how easy the transition from journalism to comms was. So, like I said, sometimes they can be seen as opposite. So, working at St. Joe's and working with comm directors and everything like that, it could just be a little difficult sometimes. But really, it's just the other side of the coin, and you can have a good relationship, and it's really the same skill set. So, if you have strong writing skills, if you have strong public speaking skills and interviewing skills, all of those things translate. And I didn't realize that that would be a good transition, and to be open minded about that. And that was really helpful, I guess, and surprising.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to shift gears real quick and focus on the actions that students need to take. And I'd like to remind our listeners to post any questions that you have in the chat, and they'll be shared during the Q&A portion of the session. So I'm going to ask you about internships in a moment, but for now, what are 2 to 3 experiences that you would suggest for students to engage in during college to help them prepare for entering this field upon graduation?
Yeah, so I would say a couple of things that are probably unique to St. Joe's as well. I would say if you can get involved with any sort of service, that's actually really helpful. So no matter what career you're in, I know all of the people that I graduated with, that was a really strong asset that made them stand out. Oftentimes you're going to have the same resume as other people, the same internships and skills. And so to really stand out is to have that kind of passion and drive that you get from service. Um, so I know I mentioned that scholar that wrote that hazard pay article. She went to a Jesuit university, and she's spoken about how that drives what she's done and how she really was advocating for these essential workers who are putting their lives on their line and not getting the sort of pay that they deserved. So if there's any way to get involved in some sort of service, that's going to make you stand out because having that passion is what's going to set you apart. So I would say that's one experience. Another I would say is really getting to make personal connections and relationships with either your advisor or any other mentors. I still go to my St. Joe's advisor when I'm at a fork in the road and I don't know where to go in my career. And really finding that person who's going to go to bat for you and who's going to advocate for you, I think is a really important experience as a part of being in college and having that opportunity to do that while you're there.
That's great advice. How did your SJU education impact how you work and/or the career decisions that you've made to date?
Yeah, so I know I talked about a million times now, but really that kind of service and giving back part about St. Joe's, that's what drove me to go to St. Joe's. And then it's what got me into journalism and wanting to advocate for people who don't really have a voice. And doing that when I graduated and working in healthcare policy journalism. And there was a lot going on with the Affordable Care Act at that time. And going back to grad school and wanting to get into public service. So I went to the Bush School of Government and Public Service. And so that was kind of a continuation of my undergrad experience. So that's really kind of that's what I would say on that.
You're still muted, Erin.
Oh,
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
sorry.
Going back to internships. What types of internships should students try and secure to prepare for a role like this?
Yeah, so I would say, I guess, it's something like I said, your skills can always translate, but if you have something that you're looking specifically to do, because comms is such a broad field, I would say, within a communications internship, you can do copy editing, you can do more writing of press releases, you can do media relations. And so a lot of comms jobs, you're going to juggle all of those things, but if you can find an internship, if you're really interested in copy editing, for example, there are a ton of nonprofits out there where writing is actually a skill that is sorely needed out there. And so that's something, the more targeted internship that you can find, the more that you're going to get out of it. So I would say, be open-minded and know that you're going to have to juggle a lot of skill sets, but also trying to find something where if you want to be in the more nonprofit field, trying to narrow down that. If you want it to be more in the corporate PR world, trying to find something that's more aligned with that as well.
Sure, absolutely. As we come to a close here, I have two final questions before we move on to the Q&A. Firstly, what is something that you wish someone told you when you were in school?
So I would say that you don't have to have everything figured out at the time. So I know that there's a lot of pressure when you are applying to undergrad, and then also while you're in school, trying to figure out what the next step is when you graduate. But to know that when you get the Jesuit education, and if you're in the comms field, that those skill sets are going to translate to a lot of other careers. And so if you're thinking about multiple different things, the generation above us kind of went into a certain trade and were in that company for their whole life. But our generation, we don't have a linear career path, really. We usually can jump and it looks a little bit more zigzag than generations before us, I think. And so just knowing that whatever you enter into after school, you don't have to be locked in. And to know that those skill sets that you're getting in undergrad can translate to a lot of different careers or jobs within the comms sector.
That's a great point. Absolutely. You kind of started to talk about it a little bit, but what would be one piece of advice you would give to students who are interested in this path that you would leave them with?
Yeah, so I would say that's probably a big piece of it. And I would also say, to go back what I'm saying before about really trying to find, one or two people who can serve as mentors to you. So whether that's through an internship, through St. Joe's, it's sometimes more important to have personal connections as opposed to getting the most elite internship that you can out there, especially being in the DC market, which I've been for my entire career. You're going to be up against a lot of people who are coming from schools like Harvard and everything like that. But if you really find someone who's willing to invest in you, that's really the best thing that's going to help you, because if you have that person, you can call them 5 or 6 years later and ask them for a recommendation letter, and they're going to be able to do that for you. So really trying to network and trying to build those connections are probably the best thing, and to not stress as much about trying to get, that perfect internship or something, but really finding someone at the internship that you can get, or someone at St. Joe's who can follow you through your career and be there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. Well, thank you so much for answering those questions. Now we're going to transition into the Q&A portion of the session. So students, if you have a question, please use the raise hand icon, and I'll call on you when it's your turn. Please let the guests know your name and your year at SJU. Or feel free to drop them in the chat too.
Erin, I can kick it off with a question while we let the students kind of think through what they might want to ask. Erin, you mentioned grad school, and so you worked for a little bit, then you decided, okay, I'm going to go to grad school, which sort of led you to where you are, right? Can you talk about your decision to go to grad school? You worked for a few years and then you went. So can you talk about the timing and what that process was like for you, and then why you ultimately landed on the program at the school that you did?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it was a tough decision to make. It is something that I think a lot of the people that I graduated with had to deal with as well. And so when I was in my job, it was a really great job. I liked it a lot and I learned a lot, but I just felt like there wasn't really a next step within the company I was at. And so I really didn't think there was anything in terms of growth more at that company. However, I had another job opportunity. And so I was really conflicted about, do I want to stay on this path? Will going to grad school kind of take me out of the market? You know, is that going to hurt? But what I found that is that it kind of leapfrogs you. So when you go to grad school, you might feel like you're falling behind as your peers are getting promotions and everything like that. But when you come out of grad school, it sets you up for a more targeted job and more exactly what you want to do. And it kind of in the long term leapfrogs you and puts you a step ahead. So there's no wrong way to do it. It is a tough decision, but I highly recommend working for a few years before jumping into grad school because you just have a much clearer idea of what you want to get out of grad school. I think a lot of people that kind of jump into it out of undergrad see it as a continuation from undergrad, whereas really it can be more beneficial if you know exactly what you want to do when you come out of it. There was certainly people in my grad program that did come from undergrad and they got great jobs out of it, but I know a lot of professors that I had at grad school tell people that you should really work for a few years and really want to make sure that you're getting the most out of that experience. And as far as the program that I landed on, so I also was had a history major in undergrad, and I took some political science courses as well. And so I was covering healthcare policy, which was a lot of fun, but I wanted to get more into what I was studying in undergrad and make that connection between writing and comms and what I was more interested in. And so that's what led to the specific programs that I looked at, which landed me in the nonprofit and Brookings institution world. And I actually went to a political science professor at St. Joe's and asked her for advice. And she is the one who recommended the programs for me. So that's kind of how I landed where I did.
Really cool. Thank you. Erin, I know you and I can see different things in the chat. So I have a ton of questions I can ask, but are there any questions coming to you through the chat?
Yes, I have a message here from Adriana. What has been the biggest hurdle you've overcome?
Yeah, that is a great question. I would say being in grad school and going back into the job market was the biggest hurdle. So coming out of undergrad, I had a bunch of internships. And so I was able to leverage those contacts in order to get to where I was able to work out of undergrad. But jumping into grad school and going back into the school environment was in and of itself a big obstacle. It is when you're out of it and going back into it is really different. And then going back into the job market after being out of it for a couple of years, you kind of have to get your feet wet again in reaching back out to the contacts that you had and also trying to establish new contacts, especially if you're kind of switching gears a little bit. I was in journalism and going into comms. And so trying to get on the other side of that and getting new contacts was the biggest hurdle. But like I said, going back to the people that I had already networked with, were able to give great advice to kind of leapfrog into that.
Awesome. And sort of a follow-up question here. Is there anything at your time at St. Joe's that you would have done differently when you were in your undergrad?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, if anything, taking more comms classes. So like I said, I was more journalism focused, but I knew that I didn't want to ultimately end up in journalism. So I knew that I wanted to end up on the comms side. And so probably taking more opportunities. It was a little harder back then because I was one of the first comms students. So the program launched while I was there, but definitely take advantage of as many courses as you can.
Absolutely. If anybody else has another question, feel free to drop it into the chat or raise your hand. If not, I know Christine said she has a few.
Yeah, I do have another. So Erin, you talked about networking a few times, right? Using your relationships and building relationships with people so they're willing to kind of advocate for you. Can you talk about how you go about sustaining those relationships? I know sometimes students feel a little awkward reaching out to people and are not quite sure how to like just get started with that. Can you talk a little bit about how you've gone about that in your career?
Yeah. So it is a difficult thing, especially when you're first trying to get into it. But I know for me, I had my first internship. It was actually an internship program in DC. It was the Washington Center, and it was coordinated through St. Joe's. And I was assigned an advisor. And so I went to her very early on, and I said I made a list of places that I wanted to work, kind of like dream jobs. And I went to her and I said, do you know anyone who works at these companies? And she was able to refer me to a few people here and there. And then I did the same thing for my bosses at my internship. And people are really willing to help you. So it is a bit awkward, but everyone really is willing to help you out. And so for me, it was kind of meeting one person and then from that person, meeting another person. And you can kind of form a chain from that. So if you have some sort of advisor, starting there, if you have a boss at an internship, I know my boss at one internship was invaluable in making connections, knowing the career and what I wanted to do. He would say, "Oh, I know someone who works for this outlet and who does this and who does that." And so it's really just taking that first step in your immediate network. So at your immediate internship, talking to your colleagues and talking to people, asking for coffee, for coffee people. I know it's a little bit difficult with COVID right now. But even if it's not your boss and you have a coworker who you think has a really interesting career path, people are really there to help you. And so just starting with that. And to follow up, it's always good every couple of months or maybe every year or so to just check in with contacts. And as you kind of move up through your career, you realize that you will be kind of reaching back to people. So my boss that I had my first job out of college, I reached back out to like a year later just to catch up. And he had moved to another job. So just we had a phone call. And then a year later, he helped connect me with grad school. So just following up, they love to hear from you. I know it feels a bit awkward, but just reaching out and saying, how are you doing? What are you up to? And this is what I'm up to is always very helpful.
It's super fun to hear that coming from an alum, just because I know on the student end, they sometimes feel a little awkward reaching out. And so hearing that people have been helpful to you, I think is really encouraging to them. Erin, I have one more. Do you have any coming through so I don't interrupt students?
I just have one that came through.
Go for it.
Do you find that there's a comm major that your colleagues graduated, or a common major, sorry, that your colleagues graduated with, / what major do you think would be the most beneficial in your field?
Yeah, so I would say, and I kind of struggled with when I was at St. Joe's and I was trying to figure out, I'm really interested in political science and history as topics, but I know I really want to work in the communications field. And so I was struggling, do I do a history major? Do I comms major? And really what I realized, it's up to you because it's, like I said, those skill sets are going to be there. And so if you're really passionate about doing political science and you want to be in comms, it's okay to mix around and do both or have one as a minor, one as a major. It's okay to do that. And just know that when you go to an interview, you can amplify certain things and you can highlight certain things and you'll have that skill set. So really just use what you're passionate about, because when you go to an interview, that's what's going to stand out. And knowing that it's okay if you want to get into comms or journalism, and if you want to do writing, that if you are a history major or you do something else or do political science, you still have those skill sets to leverage. And so really just choosing something that you're passionate about is the most important. And you can always, mix and match and just really highlight that in interviews as well.
That's great. Let me see here. I don't see any more questions in the chat.
Okay, I have one more. So can you tell students about your first job search? So when you got that first job out of college, what was your job search like? What were the things that you felt like, looking back, maybe you do differently, or were there things that went really well? I know that job searching has a lot of ups and downs. And so I think it's always helpful to hear about other people's experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. So it can definitely be a stressful time. Senior year, you're trying to figure out what you want, and you're trying to, figure out if I can get a dream job or anything like that. So for me, I kind of casted a wide net in terms of where I applied, but like I said, I reached back out to people I had interned with. So I went back to the 2 or 3 internships that I had during school and asked if they had any openings, or if they knew of any openings. So I kind of started there and tried to work out that way. And ultimately, I got an internship first, which led me to my first job. So I got an internship that started 2 weeks after I graduated, did that for 2 or 3 months, and then landed my first job. So I would say don't be afraid to do that either. I had previously met my boss that was at this internship and reached out to him, and he said, we don't have any entry level job openings, but I encourage you to do this internship. I applied and got it, and he was able to put me in touch where his first job was actually. And that's how I got that job. So it's really about that networking that's key. So I would say when you're looking, it's okay to cast a wide net, but definitely reach back out to your network, and try to start there and kind of narrow it down that way. See if there's any opportunities with the St. Joe's network. If your advisors have anyone, I know my advisor connected me with Hawk alumni, which was really helpful. So while I was in DC, there was Hawk alumni that I met. So kind of using those networks, those contacts, and also where I interned as well, can really just get the jump start that you need when you're applying.
Thank you. That was really helpful. I'm all out.
I don't see any more questions here in the chat. Does anybody else have anything that they wanted to add or ask? No? All right. Well, if that's all the questions that we have for today, please join me in thanking Erin for being so gracious to give us some of her time this afternoon and providing such great insight into her career. Erin, we're grateful for your time, and we hope to see you back on Hawk Hill soon. Viewers, just a reminder that this session was recorded and will be available for viewing on YouTube in about a week.
Sounds good. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email them. I'm happy to be put in touch with any of the students. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Take care.